this concept of machine-readable humans is something that's been batting about, and I'll tell you, I'll talk about the exact origins of it. But kind of bumping into it again and again was as a result of the project that Deirdre Mulligan mentioned that we have. It's an NSF-funded project, and it's the name of it is Value Function Handoffs in Human-Machine Compositions, where we are looking at when certain functionality is handed off between, and focusing in particular, but it doesn't have to be between human actors and machine components, and not so much, and we often focus on the issue of functionality. Are we successful? Does the machine do as well as the human, and so on? Does Compass do as well as a judge? All of these sorts of questions, but also what are we not noticing that may be left behind when we perform these handoffs? So I want to just credit that. The talk that I'm going to give, and it'll probably be very evident, it's actually the first time that I'm going through this logic, going through the reasoning. And so what I found when I was following the path of reasoning is that all of a sudden I found myself in some well-trodden paths. Some of it was pretty rough, and I was hacking away at the brush on either side. But then I thought, oh my goodness, this is what Brett Frischman's been thinking about, or this is what Julie Cohen has been doing. But with apology, I haven't had the opportunity to digest some of this work. And if you see any of your work in some of this reasoning, please don't hesitate to tell me, because it's very, very early days. So it started out with obfuscation, this particular line of thinking. And, oops, wrong thing. And initially, and the idea of obfuscation, now that I've had, 11 years to be thinking about what is obfuscation, the idea of injecting entropy into a system. And I should mention my collaborators in this entire thinking about data obfuscation: Daniel Howe, Vincent Tubiana, Mushan Zeraviv, and Finn Brunton, with whom I wrote the book on obfuscation. With Track Me Not in 2006, we were interested, it started out as a project in privacy in relation to web search, kind of an indignation that a search company, and how naive does it seem today, that search companies should not have the capability of logging our searches and holding onto them and storing them and using them for all sorts of things. And eventually, after thinking that it was a privacy, straight up privacy effort, we came to understand that what it was, hopefully, what it was aiming to do was interfere with the profile that was being generated on the basis of these searches. So it's sort of what I'm saying, injecting entropy into this profile that could be emerging from web searches. So that's 2006, and after that, we're now, fast forward to here is, sorry, I keep doing that. That's Track Me Not. How do you actually get Google to, or one of the big search companies? You can't ask them. I can't call up the managers. I can't go. There was no incentive to change regulation. There was only one, what we call vector of impact, and that was actually to perform the search query, and that's why we did what we did. 2013, we now were more, I think, sophisticated in realizing that obfuscation was a successful way to obscure a profile, and in this case, we were addressing the problem of surveillance advertising. And here we assumed, or just based on the reading we were doing, that profiles were partly generated by users' clicks on particular ads. And so what ad nauseam does is it clicks on all the ads on your page, and it works with uBlock, and you can choose to either hide the ads or see the ads. But in any event, that's what ad nauseam does. clicks on all the ads. I won't play you the video, but if you go to the website, there is a very nice, not completely serious video that you can enjoy. What it also does ad nauseam is that it collects and creates this image of all the ads that have been presented to you. So if you care to, you'll have a little bit of insight into how the ads are seeing you. You know, how come I have 10 ads from, you know, shoes.com? I don't know. Complete mystery to me. But this is what it does for you. Now, there was critique based on Track Me Not back in the day, and if you've seen the book, and I won't go through these critiques, there were folks who accused it of lying and of free riding and so on. There was a much more vociferous reaction. Of course, there were, I should say, many people who wrote to us and said, we love it, and thousands of people, maybe even more than that, have been using Track Me Not, and ad nauseam, maybe even more so, has had a tremendous uptake. But there have been people who have chided us and said that we were, you know, misleading, messing the system, and I should say that unlike Track Me Not, where the search companies were not at all interested and didn't care about it, Google was upset with us, and so they banned us from the Chrome store. And for many different rounds and attempts to revise according to the requirement, you can see your extension is still not compliant with our single purpose policy. As we've already clarified, we consider your extension's functionality that blocks malware to be a distinct purpose from the function which hides and clicks ads. So firstly, this is a strange reason, because you would think that blocking malware shouldn't be seen as like a separate function, but should be part of any such system. But eventually we kept going back and back, and then finally, you know, we're still banning, but it's because it results in financial harms, and basically it translates to, you know, it interferes. It interferes. Okay. So this was, you know, the final thing. We have figured out ways to get around it. So if you use Chrome, it requires a little bit of extra work, but you can still do it. But what popped into my head was this: why did I not feel bad? Why did, you know, I tried to be a good human being? Why did I not feel guilty that I was somehow not fulfilling an ethical obligation that I had? This idea that I have an obligation to yield truth to the system, the obligation to click on ads, only those ads that you were interested in. And I didn't think I had an obligation to be legible to the system. I didn't think I had an obligation in that case to be machine readable to the system. So I started thinking, why? You know, what is it about this, the pressure to be machine readable and the resistance against that sense that I had an obligation? And that's really the beginning, that's the starting place for this question about being machine readable, and actually sort of reminded me of an article some of you may recall, Phil Agree's brilliant article, "Your Face is Not a Barcode." This idea of, you know, making humans machine readable, and yet on the other hand, being legible to a machine is critical to the activity of machine learning, to the whole process from big data to AI. If the machine is to learn, it has to read. It has to read us. So there's a conundrum. It was clear to me that, so the first thing I want to put forward is that being machine readable is dehumanizing. Just this, but of course, it didn't. The question I have been trying to explore and will try to do in the time remaining is this. Clearly, I didn't have that same kind of resistance, and I don't have it, to every attempt to machine read me. So can we pinpoint, so it's not a categorical resistance to being machine readable. It's not a general resistance to it. It's about something about that particular effort to make me machine readable that I needed to understand. And as I start thinking about, what is it about that, I start looking at other instances of where humans are machine readable, and it's all over. I mean, and more that humans are machine readable. So, I mean, we've been talking about many of them today: recommender systems, things that are very familiar to us: Netflix, Amazon, the iPhone, biometric identifiers or authenticators, Tinder, we learned recently today. And many of these instances or these attempts to make us machine readable are certainly not new. So, think back, the bank ATM machine, go in, type, recognize. So it's reading you. And I want to just sort of generally, a quick definition is the machine feedback based on you rather your characteristics. So I'm not saying the machine has to read you as a unique individual, but the machine is responding or providing feedback to you based on certain of your characteristics. Now, as I say, it's not new, and if you read my colleague's book, Ben Kafka, who is a historian, the book is about paperwork. He may even talk to you about the time of the French Revolution, and perhaps a little bit even preceding that. Many sociologists have talked about bureaucracy, and what bureaucracy attempts to do, the systems of bureaucracy, is to read you in terms of some of your characteristics and respond to you appropriately based on those. So I'm going to sort of look at just really two of these things, two clusters of the concerns. One of the concerns about the dehumanizing consequences of being machine readable is that it's reductive. So the human is saying, you've reduced me to a few fields of information, and now you are responding to me as those information fields and not as me as a total human being. It's like this idea of the data doppelganger. Now, many of you will have heard me go on my rant about automated phone answering services, the kind where you call up and it says, if you want to fly to the US, press 1. If you want to fly outside, press 2, and so on. And it's very frustrating because you say, this machine is just not getting me, and it's reduced me to these options, but that's not exactly what I wanted. Second is the kind of hard of hearing version, so you aren't given the menu anymore. It's like, did you say Cincinnati? And you have to speak it loud and clear, and if you've got an accent or if you're slurring for some reason, the machine just doesn't get you at all, and you're desperately trying to press 0 to get to a human who has a more subtle understanding of you. And finally, I think we're at a point where natural language processing, we're getting much better at that, and let's face it, the machine is a lot smoother. But nevertheless, what's going on is a kind of reduction of the human by being machine readable. Other examples that may put you in a better mood are, news about how good mole readers have become. That now I put this in quotations. They're now as good as dermatologists in certain circumstances at recognizing cancerous moles, and these are all instances where there's reductivism, but we aren't necessarily worse off because of the reductivism that's taking place. So sometimes it could just be a matter of, are they helping us? Are they hurting us? Is it something we want, like when we call up and we get to the automated answering machine? Sometimes reductivism is a very good thing, and those of us in the field of privacy know that some of the solution to privacy problems is let's only provide the field of information that is relevant to a particular transaction. We don't need to yield everything about us. So sometimes reductivism is a good thing. Reductivism can be bad when in cases of prejudice where, say, the racial category can result in certain problems. And of course, there are labor issues because the human operators may be put out of jobs, and receptionists, maybe dermatologists and pathologists. So also to note, and this actually gets to the point Deirdre made, is sometimes even though the systems can improve tremendously, and I don't use Siri, but it's so amazing. People should take videos, or maybe they have. People saying, okay, when does Passover fall in 2019? Answer, correct answer. And you just like big grin. You still can't believe that you can ask this question rather than type it into the search engine, which is fine. And you may think you understand the machine and that the machine understands you. But let's say you said, did Donald Trump or Barack Obama have more people attend his inauguration? And let's see whether you're going to trust that answer. So reductivism is important, but it doesn't seem to be what was really troubling me. So the concern I had, has rather to do with efficiency. And I feel happy to be talking about efficiency in a business school. Because one thing that you often hear computer scientists and economists say is assume that efficiency is a good in its own right. So we look at this, producing an outcome at the lowest cost. And here's another definition, producing a desirable outcome with least waste, expense, effort, or expenditure of resources. And of course, once you do that, then you have to, like the philosopher says, whose desires, who's enjoying the benefits, who's paying the cost. So efficiency is fraught. And what I think is going on in some of these instances is that the efficiency is being distributed in a certain way. So the phone answering system may be efficient for the business, but it's not necessarily efficient for the person who's calling in. So what the machine does, in interjecting the machine in the middle, is to create efficiencies for some and inefficiencies for others. So that's kind of getting to the heart of what my concern was. But, and here I hope there are no Heidegger experts in the audience. This is now kind of the final point, because I find Martin Heidegger virtually inscrutable. And this is an article that I've tried to read, and I've tried to assign it to my courses, and it's been very difficult. Heidegger did get this. So in this article, Heidegger's trying to say, what is the essence of technology? Can we find the essence of technology? So one of the things he comes up with is just what I've said. It's, driving onto the maximum yield at the minimum expense. So in that sense, technology is instrumental. It tries to extract maximum, but as we've just seen, efficiency can be very biased in its yield, and it can, rather than create maximum output for minimum input, it can shift around maximum output for one, but the input comes from somewhere else. But finally, I think I understood this particular concept, and that is the concept of standing reserve. What Heidegger is tries to get at, and he thinks of this as the essence of technology. It's not what it does, it's the way it frames the world. And the way technology, and you can agree or disagree with whether this is the essence of technology, but rather to focus on this concept of standing reserve, what this thing, which he called technology, but I'm just saying, think about it as standing reserve, it looks at everything, and Heidegger was particularly upset about the way technology looked at nature. You look at a forest, you don't see a forest, you see timber. So you view the world through this, how can it provide something for me? And so timber then is the standing reserve. It's the technological framing of a forest. And so what we're doing is we're reducing nature to something that's usable or convenient or valuable to the operator of that technology. And it has a ring of Kant's categorical imperative, which is we should treat people as ends, not as means only. And Heidegger also looked at the way technology treats humans as potential standing reserve. Now even though this is my last slide, coming back to the question about, let's say in this case, Google collecting information about us, creating profiles, this activity, this process that we're experiencing day in and day out, and now we have to engage in that. We have to yield only true information, is to create of humans, to place humans as standing reserve for the efficient benefit of this particular system of advertising surveillance. Ultimately, I consider this to be dehumanizing. I have no idea if there's anything that can be done about it, but just this little twist of understanding that we are being forced to become standing reserve for these systems is a way of beginning to understand what might be the ethics of resistance. Thank you.
Who had more people at their inauguration, Barack Obama or Donald Trump? Came back, who plays more golf, Donald Trump or Barack Obama? PolitiFact certified, though, so at least the answer was correct, even if it was not to that question. All right. So that was an interesting moment, intervention in this whole thing. I was going to say, Kevin, you should compose symphonies because you've managed to string together people, I think, almost intuitively, who seem to be speaking to the previous speakers, which I think has worked out really well. Like the flow of these last 2 days has been really astounding. I'm especially thrilled to be coming after Helen because I loved what she said and how she said it, and I always do, so that's fun. And I really love coming after Bruce because I also loved everything he said, but I actually am not crazy about how he said it. And so that's kind of what I'm talking about today. But let me ask you a question first. If you had an app on your phone or a feature on your phone that let you see a running tally of the number of seconds or minutes that you held it in your hand and looked at it in a 24-hour period. All right, let's imagine you had that. It'd actually be kind of good because, like, if your number's too high, you feel guilty, and the quantified self that puts away your phone, that would be really interesting. But okay, let's imagine you have that. Like, how many minutes do you think in a 24-hour period you do this? I don't know, 30 minutes out of 24 hours?
Hours.
More? I mean, it depends on the day, obviously, but it would average out over time, right? Okay, let's say 30 to 300 minutes, right?
5 hours.
All right. So let me ask you a different question. How many apps do you have on your phone? Does anyone know? Like, have you counted your apps lately?
I never allow more than 2 screens.
Oh, that's discipline. That's great. That's like, yeah, that's like inbox 2 screens. That's pretty good. Like, so yeah, I mean, but you have this temptation to download the latest app you've thought about. It's in the Times on Tuesday, whatever, right? So you could pretty soon have 150 apps. I think I have about 50, but I really haven't counted. Now, but let's think about that time per day, right? So that was just looking at the phone like this, right? Then add to that the minutes per day, seconds and minutes per day, where you had earbuds in your head and it's connected to the phone. So you're still interfacing with your phone, or you're still dealing with your phone, right? Another 60 minutes maybe, depending on your commute or your dog walk or whatever, or your workout time. And then if you add the minutes from I have Apple CarPlay in my car, maybe you have something like that, that sort of interaction, right? It builds up. Pretty soon, we're talking about a lot of minutes, even if it's beyond this thing, right? You don't have to be looking at it anymore. But even when you think about this, right, the number of minutes where it's in your hand, it is of your hand. It's not just in your hand. It's not just the way that you cradle it. You're touching it. My authentication process is to touch it with my thumb, because my thumbprint is registered here. I am dehumanized every time I go in here to do that, right? Anybody have WeChat on their phone? Oh, all right, a few people, right? So WeChat, which is on 100 million phones around the world right now, mostly concentrated in the People's Republic of China, but spreading steadily to other places, largely through the Chinese diaspora, but not exclusively, is a pretty fascinating application. Among the various things you can do, right? So WeChat is social media, but way beyond it. It does everything Facebook and Instagram offer you. Connections with a group of friends, communication tools, photographs, filters, all that, bunny ears on the photos, that kind of stuff. Does a lot of what Twitter does. It's a news service, but beyond that, it has a number of uses in sort of daily transactions. People link it to their credit cards or their bank accounts, and you can pay your utility bills. You can use it at vending machines. It's a QR code reader that's usable all over the place. You reveal your location, so you can be tracked by a group of friends, not to mention the government of the People's Republic of China. But all of that, in addition, you can search for library books at a branch close to you and reserve the books, and you can go up and get them. All right, so so if you have WeChat, there's a good chance that number tracking how often you're cradling your phone is going to go up quite a bit, because so many of the things you do in life are now through this one app. In addition, the number of apps you have on your phone might shrink tremendously. You don't need the banking app, right? You don't need a connection to your library. You don't need Amazon anymore, because a lot of those transactions go through WeChat too. I mean, tremendous amount of concentration there. WeChat, by the way, right, has 100 million users. Facebook has 2.1 billion users. WeChat, despite that number, terrifies Facebook. But it also stands right now as, in many ways, a model for what Facebook would like to be to us. Facebook would like to take care of all of those transactions for us, with us, through us. I assume you have Messenger. If you have Facebook, you probably have Messenger on your phone, right? Facebook Messenger. Good, don't put Facebook. There's lots of reasons not to. But if you have Facebook Messenger and you look at it every month, sometimes faster than every month, you get new features. And many of them are WeChat-like. So you can do payments. You can order food. You can order up an Uber on Messenger now. It's clear the model for Messenger, that WeChat is clearly the model for Messenger. It's one of the reasons that Facebook's really pushing it on us. The standard Facebook app, we're familiar with it. It's hard to teach us to use the Facebook app in new and special ways. Adding features to the Facebook app doesn't get a lot of experimentation, exploration, doesn't really dig into our habits. But if you add it to Messenger, it does a little bit better. All right. By the way, Facebook Messenger is where you would find very soon the Facebook version of Siri. So it's called M, it's voice recognition. It's Alexa/Siri. The Facebook version will be through Messenger. So I would venture that Facebook Messenger will become a much more important part of our electronic diet over the next few years, unless you totally want to resist, but you know that you won't resist forever. All right. Do you play Pokemon Go? Anybody play? Oh, 1, 2. Bruce, you play Pokemon Go? All right, good. So a few people play Pokemon Go, right? So one of the things you can do through WeChat is augmented reality. They have a number of augmented reality. It's actually early in the development, but basically what you do on Pokemon Go on its own distinct app, you will soon be able to do through WeChat, and who knows, probably through Facebook Messenger. Both WeChat and Messenger are good for a variety of games, and they're adding augmented reality for this. But the reason I wanted to put Pokemon Go up is the experience of playing Pokemon Go is the experience of being content. Right? So much of our framework for how we've talked about digital media for 2 decades, since the tornado, has been about content as distinct from humans, as something that happens to us, something we produce, something we consume, something we share, something we send. But in Pokemon Go, you are the content as much as any of these monsters are. It's about you. It's where you are. It's this device on your skin, this device probably with earbuds in at the same time, risking getting hit by a car. Nonetheless, this is about you as content. And so the story I'm telling here is about everything becoming content and everyone becoming content, to the point where the distinction between content and non-content, between communication and not communication, between media and not media, basically disappears. So imagine that. Imagine thinking about the way forward as a scholar, as a lawyer, as an activist, thinking about the way forward in an environment where the distinction between content and non-content doesn't matter much anymore. What we regulate becomes different. What we care about becomes different. Our framework for discussing almost quaint conceptions of privacy becomes different. Our framework for discussing security becomes different. It really just changing that concept, removing that distinction, or at least watching that distinction steadily erode as we get more Pokemon Go type services in our lives. That's going to change a lot about how we look at a lot of these questions. Now Google, if you remember Google's mission statement, not Alphabet's mission statement. I don't even know if Alphabet has a mission statement, but Google's mission statement is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So it's organizing information, right? That's the purpose of Google since 1998, was to organize information, a distinct thing in the world. So humans working with machines and code will organize this thing called information, right? And its goal is to make it universally accessible to humans and useful to humans. So that maintains that distinction, right? That human information distinction. Well, look at the history of Google, fascinating, triumphant, controversial, but basically Google quickly became, you might think of as the operating system of the web. We all found it very hard to manage the web, to manage taking something valuable out of that experience, putting more valuable things back into that system without interfacing with Google. Right? It just became so essential fairly quickly that it became the operating system of the web. And then not long after that, starting around 2004, 2005, it quickly became one of 2 major operating systems of mobile devices. And it remains so. It remains the most popular operating system of mobile devices. So that's a very different role to play. As soon as it's the operating system of mobile devices that people are holding in their hands, then it's not organizing the world's information for humans to make it accessible to humans and useful to humans. It's organizing humans, right? It's actually tracking where humans are in the world. It's making sure that it guides humans from point A to point B, from my hotel to this room at one point, right? So the operating system metaphor, I think, is something I want you to pay a lot of attention to. Obviously, it's the title of my presentation. But I think the operating system idea explains and describes a lot of the most interesting dynamics that we face now and are going to face even more in the next few years. All right? In fact, as you'll see, I want you to replace internet with operating system. I think that would be very helpful as a conceptual leap. You might remember this in 2010. Chris Anderson, who was then editor of Wired, had this big cover story, "The web is dead." And if you read it on the web and you went to the comments section, you saw all those, like a whole string, hundreds of comments. "What do you mean the web is dead? I'm reading this on the web." You know, keep your day job, right? So, now, if you actually read the article, I don't know how many people did, it had a couple of pretty obvious observations where VC money is going increasingly, like away from web services to app services. But the larger argument, which I think was a bit prescient, and I rarely give Chris Anderson credit for this, for much, but he was quite prescient in saying that it's not just that it's not that the web is dead, because that's, I mean, this phrase should be dead, right? This is dead, blank is dead. But what he was really saying, or what he should have said, is that the web is a lot less interesting. By 2010, the web was actually uninteresting. It's not where creativity was, it's not where action was, it wasn't where controversy was. It was increasingly not where the money was going, and just as importantly, not where the money was coming from. What was interesting? Apps, mobile, augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. He actually didn't go as far as to say virtual reality, artificial intelligence, but even in 2010, it didn't take many leaps to get to those. That's where the interesting stuff was. Jonathan Zittrain has said on a number of occasions that the internet is basically a mass illusion. And by that, he doesn't mean it doesn't exist, that we've made the whole thing up. He means that what we mean by the internet and the habits with which we interact with the internet and the structure and function of the internet is kind of overdetermined by our metaphor of the internet. We've built things for it, extracted things from it, regulated or failed to regulate it on terms of an illusion. This notion that there was this global network of networks that was universally open, that was a level playing field, that was fundamentally democratic, that fostered creativity, right? But when you believe all of that, you start building stuff on this platform that resembles that ideology. Now, of course, we saw that illusion fray at a number of points, and no one has realistically been able to look at this network of networks and say it works the same way everywhere, the People's Republic of China being the most obvious outlier in this. But the other important thing about this illusion of the internet is I like to think of it as desktop determined. When we came up with this metaphor of the internet, this illusion of the internet, it was a separate space. We actually used spatial metaphors for it, right? We would go online. We would enter a chat room. We literally would walk to a place in our house or our office, and there would be a box, and we would log on, right? Again, spatial metaphors. Log on, upload, download. Now, none of that describes what we do now, right? There's no online, offline, upload, download anymore. It's a consistent thing, right? So it's broken down. Even that mass illusion has broken down. The notion of a completely open set of systems connected by an open network, nobody really believes that describes what we do or where the action is anymore. So there's a lot of reason to just push that word internet out of our lives. Again, not that we don't have the infrastructure, not that we don't have a lot of those features that are very important in our lives. It's just not helpful as we go forward and try to face the challenges and identify the problems that we face and the opportunities we face. Embeddedness is a really key function here. We have to remember that this is embedded in my hand, and just as importantly, I am embedded in the data flows that go to and from AT&T. I am embedded in Apple, Apple's embedded in me, I am embedded in AT&T, AT&T is embedded in me. Fortunately, I'm not embedded in Comcast, but am I allowed to say that in this room? Okay. Right, exactly. All right. Think about these companies. The big five. The 5 highest capitalized companies on Earth, at least since March 2017, and they keep shifting in order, right? They're the 5 companies we most obsess about here. And think about what they do to make money. And think about the ways that they compete. Now, the most obvious way, Facebook and Google compete directly in the advertising market. And they do so successfully, they almost don't need to compete. I could carve up the world. There's enough advertising money out of there. They can go on forever and just be ad companies, never have to build anything cool, never have to get into augmented reality, virtual reality, any of that. Just keep rolling with the ad business, racking up the billions. They could just do that. But the other companies, they actually do very different. And by the way, it's important to remember that Facebook and Google, to us, it's not customers. They both perform very different roles in our lives. I mean, sometimes they overlap, right? Sometimes they produce services for us that are similar. But for the most part, you turn to Facebook for certain things in your life. You turn to Google for other things in your life. Now, Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft, well, look, Apple and Microsoft and Google are in the server business, right? Server space business, and that's a big business. For Amazon, Microsoft's still selling and leasing software as its fundamental role. It has this thing called Bing that nobody really cares about, doesn't really compete with Google. It makes the Xbox, but in the hardware world, it's just a blip. Apple, of course, is all about this box, this beautiful sealed box that's stuck in my hand all the time. That's where most of its money comes from. But, it does 100 other things, a bunch of them loss leaders. But if you think about it, there's not a lot of direct competition in 2017, except for that ad thing. But again, there's just so much money there, they barely need to compete, right? They can carve up the world and just be fine. They compete for labor, right? They want the best coders, the best engineers, the best managers, the best HR staff. They're all pretty close to each other with the exception of Microsoft. So, and of course they compete for status and influence in Washington and Brussels. At the same time, we think of them as one sector. And if you just stop the clock right now, they're not actually one sector. There are many different sectors, and some of these companies compete in different. We call it tech. So I started thinking, I wrote a book about Google, and I just finished a book on Facebook, and I started thinking, what do these companies have in common? What does this sector mean? What do we mean when we say Silicon Valley? What's the long game here? And basically, the long game seems to be to embed their data flows into our body and around our body. And every one of those companies has a strategy, a product line, a long-term vision to get us more deeply and more consistently embedded in their data flows, and to get their data flows to flow over us more consistently. More monitoring, more surveillance, more influence on our lives. So these are some of the most sort of glaring examples of it. You could put up a dozen more examples. Now, Bruce used the phrase that I actually would also like to wipe out, Internet of Things. I think Internet of Things is an unhelpful term. Basically, what we're talking about here as we move forward is neither an internet, nor is it really about things. Now, there are things, right? There are like RFID chips and boxes that flow around Walmart's warehouses. But what really matters and what's crucial here is that these are proprietary networks with embedded sensors that are increasingly on human bodies, potentially in human bodies. That's not far-fetched. It's happening right now. If you have an Apple Watch, you're all in on this, right? It is not an Internet of Things. It's especially not Internet-y, because there's no way that this is going to be an easy-to-add-on, customizable network of networks where anybody can just build an application on some imaginary network, right? The security risks alone are way beyond that. There's just no way. In addition, this network that is being built out tends toward monopoly for the simple reason that consistency, standardization, and stability are major aspects of an ideal system, right? To have too many different cooks building out a complicated system and trying to maintain interoperability, that's madness. It's a much more likely game, and probably a safer game, if one or two companies basically call the shots on the basic infrastructure choices. So I think the Internet of Things distracts us in two ways. Well, first of all, we all love the Internet. It's this great thing, right? The cartoon version of the Internet excites us. It makes us want to work there. It makes us want to, teach our kids how to code. Get into the Internet. Surf, right? We want to surf. What's wrong with surfing? Is great, right? So all those things that we took out of the 20th century, it's a very positive thing, but it doesn't actually describe what's being built. And secondly, I think, as I said, just as importantly, forget about the things. Think about the people. Think about the bodies. All right. One of the things we have to remember as we get deeper into these networks, into these systems, into these flows of data, is that we're outsourcing our decisions increasingly. When I hold this in my hand and I ask Google how to walk from point A to point B, I'm limiting my own choices, my own likelihood of making a terrible mistake and walking into the river, right? I am making sure that my choices are limited. They're structuring my choices. And every Google search I do, and when I ask Siri the answer to that question, right, I am outsourcing my decision making to a company that, for the most part, does pretty well. Siri didn't do great with that question, but I don't know, see, if you use Siri, you actually would not have said, it'll probably give you the right answer, because it almost never does. All right.
Well,
now this, familiar thing, right? Amazon's recommending things. By the way, this is an actual recommendation I got one year. Sasia Sassen's Mobility of Labor, Easy Bake Oven, and a Furby. I just thought this was a great combo. Like, Amazon knows me so well. And I actually bought all these things, and my then 6-year-old daughter loved the Sassen book. So the Furby, you won't be surprised to hear, disappeared mysteriously very quickly. Can't explain it. I think there's some landfill somewhere in the country with a whole bunch of Furbies. And of course, microwave oven, Easy Bake microwave. It's not even a microwave. Well, it says microwave here, but Easy Bake oven, used once, soggy cookies. That was fun back at the closet. But nonetheless, right, these were good recommendations based on my shopping history at that point with a 6-year-old daughter and an interest in sociology. But it gets beyond that now as Amazon has embedded itself in our homes so deeply through these very devices meant to remove friction from our lives, meant to install convenience. You can stick one of these little buttons on your machine, on your washing machine, and always have detergent. Whenever you see it going down, you push it. In a day or two, you get detergent delivered to you. But note, you don't just get detergent. You don't even get to choose your detergent. You get Tide delivered to you. We're outsourcing our decisions. The paradox of choice, right? The anxiety we all get when we go and look at the cereal aisle in the Kroger, in the Harris Teeter, so overwhelmed by this number of choices. We know that's a problem, and that's one of the reasons Amazon's in our life. Amazon solves that problem. When you do an Amazon search, you don't see 50 boxes of cereal. You see 8 boxes of cereal, more often different sizes than different types. They're filtering through and taking care of the paradox of choice for you. The same way, if you think about all of these ways that they're embedding the data in our lives, much of it is to narrow our set of choices. This has economic consequences. This has competition consequences. This is great, not just for Amazon, it's great for Procter & Gamble. And you can bet that Procter & Gamble and Amazon are having regular meetings about new and special ways to get a special fast lane into our lives. And of course, there is Alexa, which has its own implications. All right. So here's the thing. The operating system of our lives is always on. Yesterday, Tim reminded us of how the attention economy works and talked about the ways in which, one of the things he said, which I thought was really helpful and really brilliant, was the ways in which so you take something like antitrust law and you view it through the dynamics of attention rather than through consumer prices, which in some areas of life, like advertising, are constantly dropping. And you get a different set of answers, a more helpful set of answers, one that actually addresses human needs. But the attention economy has limits. Right? Our attention has limits. That's why attention is high-priced and valuable. Unlike information, right? Information is ubiquitous. Information is a torrent. There's too much of it. So the information economy doesn't really make sense because you can't be economical with it. On the other hand, with attention, you have to be economical with it. And as Tim describes in his book, we are constantly being pulled left and right, up and down, every loud noise, every flash, trying to grab our attention, trying to steal our attention. There are attention thieves everywhere, and they monetize our attention. Well, one of the things about this, a system in which you're living with Alexa in your life, is that they have managed, through that, to work around the attention problem. Because Alexa is meant to fade into the background. It kind of looks striking at first. But after a while, it disappears into your room. And after a while, you don't even have to think to express a desire, and then it satisfies your desire. In addition, it's always on. So it doesn't even need to grab your attention to react to you. You can just say, oh man, I really feel like Beethoven's Ninth. Boom, it's on, right? It doesn't even need an actual interaction of any substance or duration. It certainly needs no deliberation on your part. You are trained by Alexa to intimately and almost invisibly deal with it over time. So this folds in the attention economy as well. So what do we do about it? Well, back to WeChat, right? WeChat is a federated operating system. It takes all these different functions we want done in life, and it gives us one way to do it. WeChat is one model of an operating system of our lives. Alexa is another model of an operating system of our lives. And there are a number of different models, a number of different ways into our lives, through our cars, through our clothes, through our skin, through our devices. And they're all increasingly doing more things for us, more Swiss Army knife type functions. Perhaps doing everything a little bit worse. The sound that comes out of Alexa is pretty crappy. Nonetheless, people are spending $184 for it, for crappy sound, so they don't have to pick up the phone and type in something. That is a tremendous amount of money and time that you're spending for the sake of convenience. So one of the first steps to rehumanizing ourselves is to revalue inconvenience, to build friction back into our lives. And actually, putting aside all of the policy efforts and all the engineering efforts that we're going to have to consider to address the negative externalities of an increasingly encroaching operating system of our life model, we all have to reorient our relationship, not just to each other, but to these devices, to these offerings, to these offers of convenience. We have to start a movement for inconvenience. Like, what do we want? Inconvenience. When do we want it? Well, not right now. You know, I'm willing to wait a little while. Anyway, on that, thanks for listening to me. Let's switch our names. I don't want to confuse them.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to really thank Kevin for launching this amazing set of days, and I couldn't agree more. The flow just works terrifically. I never thought I would try to talk about Heidegger in public, but I think my role in the panel is to be the standing reserve for Siva and Helen, if I got it right. What I'd like to do is talk about what I see as a couple of common points in the two presentations. Then I want to throw out a question to the two of you and come back to a theme we've heard a bit about throughout the day, more today than yesterday, on governance, where I think your presentations really tie into some fundamental problems. Let me start with some common points. It seems to be that each of you are describing a situation where it's the ubiquity of personal information that's creating this readability for humans. And it's the systems are designed to force readability, which in effect is embedding control over information away from the individuals. And I think that's where the problem that you're describing is. I think you're sharing the same view here. The locus of control is vested in automated systems, and that's privileging, I'll call it non-human values, or perhaps put another way, values without accountability to humans. So we think about Helen, you had a slide where you had good and then less human on the one side. And if you looked at some of those less human factors, essentially what I'm hearing in common between the two discussions is that those less human factors are being built in with no ability to check, no ability to have the discussions in public fora about the implications, the desirability, the shifting in informational resources that occurs because the system is baked in a way to privilege readability of individuals. I was really struck, Siva, your terminology, operating systems of our lives. You talked about it as structuring one's decision. It's really, in a sense, it's defining a new privacy offense in many ways. It's manipulation of individuals by data. Right? You're talking about manipulating. It seems to me, I mean, that's a very classic problem that we've thought about in the privacy world for a long time. Who gets to control personal information? And what is misuse of that data? And here it seems that it's the manipulation by data that's problematic, and it can only occur because the systems are designed to create the data and embed control away from the individual. My question goes to what I think may be a tension in some of your work, but I'm not sure about it. Siva, you seem to be very pessimistic about, I'll call it sort of the incentives and efficacy of self-help as to whether or not we can reach a better equilibrium where we're not simply human robotic instruments of the big five, I think as you put it. Is that a right read that you're pessimistic about the outcome?
I'm a Buffalo Bills fan, so I'm always pessimistic about the outcome. But no, yes, but I'm not sure it matters that I'm pessimistic, right? So, but I do want us to be cautious about thinking that control, or reinstilling control, is an adequate way of addressing this problem. Because control, or even just the illusion of control, is actually something that these companies are quite aware of. They constantly emphasize and remind to us that we are in control. They're called privacy controls on Facebook, right? And if you look, I mean, consider the button through which you would order Tide. They have the ability to build a sensor into every bottle of Tide that automatically dials up Amazon and delivers the next, jug of Tide, a little bit more expensive, but that's actually an unsatisfying relationship. Having us go, running out of Tide, boom, gives us the illusion of control, the illusion of influence. Many of these systems have features that are a lot like the door close button on an elevator, which usually doesn't do anything. But we like to think that I'm in a real hurry, I'm going to go boom, 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 and the door will close faster, and it never really does. But they're not going to take that button away because they know that we like pushing it, right? So we're going to increasingly see a lot of these door close buttons that don't actually do much, but give us the sense that we are opting in to something, when in fact, if anything, at most we're feeding more behavior into the feedback loop.
Well, you're describing something that's really, you're creating a masquerade of control, an illusion, that it's still the manipulation by data, because, as you said, you're feeding more into it. Helen, your work, you showed ad nauseam as a starting point, and my sense is that, and from some of your other work, is implicitly more optimistic, I think, than Siva, by suggesting that you can engineer the values into the system so that you might thwart machine readability. I sort of suggest it's thwarting machine readability by engineering. is that right? Are you optimistic on that score?
So let me explain why the thwarting of the machine readability is something that we might want to give some thought to as humans going in the direction that we seem to be going. So back to the, your use of terms like control and information and so on. This particular slice through some of the concerns we're confronting, I would say is a little bit more about autonomy than control. Now, obviously, these two terms are very well connected. And it could be that you, as a human, become a kind of cog in an efficient machine. It doesn't have to be through information. It could be, like Travis Hall, one of my PhD students, talked about tattoos in the concentration camps, or biometric identification and so on. It's not. I mean, we could cash that out in terms of information, but it's more to say we're taking humans and we're marking them in a way that makes us able to put them into a system and make the system efficient for us, like the operator of the system. So that's the concern. Now, it happens to be the case in this information-rich environment that one of the ways governments, companies are doing it is by massive collection information, creation of profiles, and then kind of, getting us or grokking us, I don't know, that's a bad word, and then being able to, and the next step is to make of us standing reserve, to say, yeah, we've got Helen. When such and such, we need such and such, she's there, her, whatever it is, but it doesn't have to be the information. It's that thing that we've created out of her that makes it convenient for her to be on standby for when we need her in our system. And when you do that to a human, you're diminishing their autonomy. And it's not so much control on a case-by-case basis, although control is also part of the story, but it's more that other thing.
So this is where I think is you're pinpointing it with autonomy, or focusing on autonomy. This is where I think the presentations are reflecting a deep capability problem that we've heard about already today, which is how we govern. And how do we assure public accountability to our social values in this context? I mean, I think the stories that you told go to the very heart of democratic governance. So when you talk about readability and engineering for readability, or creating information feedbacks to have individuals as standing reserves, that's really cutting against our notion of freedom of association in a democracy. And when we think about the kinds of monitoring that's inherent in these systems, that's designed into the systems, it's a monitoring function in opposition to what is really a prerequisite for a robust democracy, which is freedom of association. We can't have it if we have individuals designed to be standing reserves and readability engineered into our systems. At the same time, I think, Siva, your comment about operating systems of our lives is really saying that the technical infrastructure is contradicting public accountability in a way that contravenes adherence to the rule of law. So the way I get there, you have manipulation by data. That means the manipulators are able to avoid being subject to various rules because they can shift the way individuals see it, they can shift how individuals react in the society to create zones of immunity for what we might otherwise expect to be, or what a democracy may say, this is our law, this is what is supposed to happen. I think we can see this trend in other areas. We can see it, the capability problem in the cybersecurity realm. So security threats mean, and we heard this, a little bit of this from Bruce, monopolies on the use of force to assure law and order. It's no longer going to be held by the state. the kind of surveillance systems, we can think of FireEye or Palantir or Bolt Collection, the big five systems you've been describing, those resemble totalitarian approaches. And we don't really have a way, I think, to deal with that today. I'll say my takeaway is that these operating systems of our lives and machine-readable humans, to me at least, means that the democratic rule of law is going to be insufficient to assure that human values work in these systems. And I'll join some of the confessions. I think where was Yochai? I sort of sensed Yochai was backtracking on some positions he took 20 years ago. I think I was wrong to believe that law and regulation would be the solution. I think it's very fitting that we're sitting less than 4 miles from Independence Hall right now. It's actually 3.8 miles. Because I think we're in a constitutional kind of moment where we will need to develop new mechanisms for checks and balances. I'm calling it digitocracy in some work that I'm doing now. But I think we're finding representative democracy is not going to be sufficient to assure that public values and public accountability gets built into the systems that the two of you have been describing. So I would just conclude that after the digital tornado, we have to figure out how to build storm-resistant communities.
I mean, I would only quickly reply that WeChat conforms with the desires of the imperatives of the law in which it operates, right? So WeChat is designed to enforce the will of the state, but not the way Orwell would design it, but the way that Huxley would design it, right? So it's
a state that's not democratic.
Right, of course, but that's increasingly most of the world. And it's important that we focus on that as well, right? See, many of these systems and the modes of these systems are going to play differently in different places. But I think what I've been worried about in describing here, there's no clear clash with the rule of law. I almost wish there were, because that would expose the systems and the flaws and faults in the systems and the pain, both benefits and pains. So that I wish would happen. But I think one of the problems we have is that we are not seeing obvious clashes with the rule of law. I think it would be actually healthier if we did. Does that make sense?
Okay, we could talk. We only have time for some questions. So, yeah. Oh, it looks like we sparked a lot here. Where are the microphones?
So I wanted to sort of react and push back against, I guess, this idea that it's necessarily problematical to be outsourcing decisions, and that what we should do is start making, spending more of our time making decisions. Because I think that it's tricky, right? Because there are a lot of these decisions that our consumer world wants us to make that are, really not terribly important. And I personally love to outsource decisions because I have other things I want to do with my time and my life. And I think that this is actually also really important for women. I don't want to spend my time deciding about detergent. I would love to just say, Tide, just send me Tide whenever I need it. I think the issue is more about, and that's why I liked Helen's reference to autonomy, because I think it's about autonomy. Like, I want to be able to decide which decisions I want to outsource, right? And that seems to me like more important than let's keep control of all these decisions, because I think part of what the consumer world does is it tries to put us in a position where, there's all these decisions, it's very important for you to make all these decisions, and that's what we're going to invest our time in. So I guess that's just
I think in the interest of time, let's stack up a couple questions and then we'll have them respond. So
yeah,
you got the mic
thank you very much. Kevin, thanks. I think we've known each other about 25 years, and as I told you before, I really like the new Kevin Werbach. There have been a few of them. I'm Mark Stallman. I'm the president of the Center for the Study of Digital Life in New York, and I have a question for Helen. You ended your talk by saying you're not really quite sure what to do about all this. And I'm going to ask if you've considered the following. Have you considered denouncing cybernetics, systems theory, cognitive psychology, complexity science, and the tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, of researchers around the world for the past 50 years who have been all heading towards the statement that was recently thrust upon us by Jim Rutt, the past head of the Santa Fe Institute. All is computation. You'll even have, for instance, DJ Spooky getting up and saying, all is numbers, as if he was a Pythagorean. Have you thought about renouncing this massive set of research and all the people associated with it? Because they're responsible for what you're talking about.
Let's take one more and then we'll get some answers. Who's got a...
Take a lot more.
Take a lot. Do you want Neva?
Okay, so this is along these lines, but the question is also to Helen about just trying to understand, to figure out what you mean by dehumanizing in machine learning algorithmic decision making. And the question here is whether the problem is with making us also data subjects that is a feed for algorithmic or for machine learning. If that's the problem, because then the question is, do we have the same problem with social science in general? And do we have the problem in particular with, is it dehumanizing when machine learning would be used for medical, right? For detecting cancer, right? Do we feel dehumanized just because we're also a data feed in this system? Or is it something else that we want algorithmic to treat us in a human way or to work for us? So the always-on devices would actually do a better job, right? I mean, they would actually treat us as, they can feed, they will be tailored to us, to our voice, to our needs, to our habits, always on. Like the robots that treat the elderly in a human way, would that be like more humanized? And the question is, maybe it's a problem with our sense of, or a definition of humanity, or maybe we shouldn't expect algorithms to treat us as ends and as subjects, and maybe we should just treat algorithms as functional things, right? When we drive the highway and there is an exit, we don't want it to treat us as humans, right? It's just like functional.
So why don't we get some answers?
Sure. I appreciate the response. I think it's largely unimportant that I don't like the Tide button and you like the Tide button. I'm certainly not arguing for prohibition, and I'm not arguing for any particular policy or design choice. What I was hoping to instill from this talk was a different framework for identifying challenges that we're going to face in the next few years, a different vocabulary for looking forward through which we can perform our analytic skills, and then, as we deliberate, derive responses, whether that means prohibition. I don't think that's the way. But maybe it's on the table, or embrace, maybe something in between. But that wasn't what I was trying to get to. I wanted to say fundamentally, Bruce described much the same environment. He chose a particular set of problems and threats, and he described the system as a cyber-physical system. And I wanted to say, wait a minute, Bruce, what if we thought about it as a socio-technical system? What if we paid as much attention to the human bodies and the collective concerns of the society as we do the cyber and the physical, right? Don't bracket it off. I want to say, what if we did that? Do we come up with different agendas, different conclusions, different concerns? I actually think we do, and that's not to minimize. So, like, why do we care about security? For a number of reasons that we could get into, it would take another hour. But we should care deeper, which is why I loved what he was saying, not necessarily how he was saying it. And in many ways, it was a response to something that Yochai said yesterday that I'd heard him say before, and I really would love to squeeze it out of him because he says it frequently. He said some version of fake news is not the fault of technology, it's the fault of norms and institutions. To which I would respond, there is no difference, right? Technology, norms, and institutions are part of a unified field. I would rather we not ask questions like, is it the tech or is it the norms and institutions? Is it the tech or is it the humans? The fact is that we are embedded in the tech and the tech is embedded in us. It's been the case for a long time, but what has changed was, look, in 1962, we learned from McLuhan that technologies were extensions of human capabilities, right? That was the metaphor. And it works, right, for the most part, right? Light bulbs are extensions of my eyes, cars are extensions of my legs. What we're getting to now is that humans are extensions of technological systems. That may not be where we want to go. That may be a problem, that we've gone hyper-McLuhan. That is what I would like us to be concerned about. But as we analyze these systems, I want us to understand that there is no technology built outside of a field of norms and institutions. There is no norm and institution that is derived outside of the technological capabilities around it.
So I'm really pleased that, I forget you said your name, but I forgot. Mark and Niva asked the questions that you did, because it made me realize that I did not do a good job in kind of teasing these two issues apart. And maybe I slightly want to make your theses like more precise. In that I asked myself that question, is it the reductivism that I cared about? And when I say reductivism, what I mean is like the reduction of what we think of as a human into material that a computer can then deal with through the formalisms and what you're calling cybernetics. And my answer to that probe was that no, I don't think that that's what's concerning to me. Yes, it's the first step towards what is concerning to me, and that is this idea of efficiency, where we forget that efficiency is incredibly biased, and that we have to always remember that efficiency you always have to fill in what the output is and why it's desirable, and what is the cost that you're calculating as having minimized. So it isn't the first part, and Neva, I think your examples, I'm completely with you. So, if the reduction to data allows us to then, perform machine learning on moles, and we're able to identify cancer more effectively, that's great. And part of the reason that that's great is because I'm presuming that underlying that is a societal decision that, and how we get there, blah, 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 that this is a worthy thing to do. And it's, back to this point of autonomy. I'm not controlling it, but it's part of our desires and goals and purposes that we've achieved. So it's trying to get at the difference between this process of reduction that then makes us standing reserve for other people's or other entities' will only. Like, that's all it is. Like, wow, isn't it convenient? We've created this stuff that we can then use, but we forget that the stuff is actually humans that have purposes and goals and so on. And that's the twist that I found myself kind of grabbing onto. So I'm not going to renounce all of those guys.
It'd take too much time.
That's time.
I think we need to close, so thank you.